down, power lines are down.
Message of 290 characters follows.
Hello everyone, this is Patrick, in for another episode of Grid Down, Comms Up on the Prepping Academy podcast. This episode, we are going to finish up the last segment of things that we learned during Hurricane Helene. I want to pause just a minute here. The Eastern Tennessee Homestead Alliance Festival will be going on in Townsend, Tennessee in September on Friday the 12th and Saturday the 13th of September this year, 2025. I will be a guest speaker there, so if you want to come out, say howdy. I will be there talking about Hurricane Helene and communications, I believe. But it's a great event. It's a family-friendly event. There's stuff for kids to do. There's fun stuff to check out if you're into homesteading. Last year, we had a blast. It was a great event. So I want to encourage you guys, if you're in the area or within driving distance, to come check it out. And it's in Townsend, Tennessee, which is just an absolutely gorgeous place. So I encourage you guys, come pay a visit, come check it out. We've gone through a lot of the things that I have noted and listed for this, and I want to talk about a couple of other things now. And these are a couple of things that have more to do with people than they have to do with equipment and nerddom. So we're going to shift out of nerd gear, and we're going to shift into a little more political, social realm. I want to talk about team versus strategic communications. In the prepping world and the preparedness world, we focus on team communications. That's your bow thing, that's your handheld radio, and your group of people on a couple of acres. It's the, hey, there's something suspicious over here, or hey, Jim Bob cut his leg with a chainsaw, we need a Casevac ASAP, this is their location. Those are team communications. Team communications are in many ways comparatively easy, especially if you are in a permissive environment. If you are in a non-permissive environment where there is someone actively electronic warfaring against you, all this changes. But most preppers are not prepared for that, and they're not ready for that. So we're really not going to go down the non-permissive environment here. For team communications at your distribution center during a disaster, around your community, your neighborhood during a disaster, there are a lot of things that need to be considered, but that is still much easier than strategic communications. Most people in the prepping world operate in a very small, this is my circle, this is me, almost, there's a psychological term for this, and I cannot remember what it is. I'm sure someone will tell me. Basically, where you are the center of your universe and in an emergency, and you are not able to logically and psychologically shift out of taking care of my immediate needs into a much bigger scale of interoperating with other people and interoperating with the world at large, with humanity at large. And we're going to talk about that a little more in a minute. First, I want to talk about the team communications and just some basics of team communications and some problems that we encountered with team communications. First up, with team communications needs to be simple, okay? The equipment that's being used needs to be simple, because the people on your team are not radio people. People on your team have a job to do, and radio is simply a tool that is facilitating their ability to do that job. It's their ability to communicate that it is feeling, just like their cell phone does if the grid is up. They're not there to be a radio nerd. They're not there to learn how many watts it takes to bounce off of. They don't care. They just need a radio that's going to work, and it needs to be something that's simple to work. and I call it the 5-year-old check. If I can give the radio to my 5-year-old and he can use it to communicate with me while I'm out on the homestead all day long and he doesn't mess it up, then I can probably give that radio out to anybody and they will be able to do the same. Now, some of you may say that there are 5-year-olds that are smarter than some adults, and I can't argue with that, but we'll leave that alone. So it needs to be simple. It needs to be something that is typically license free in a disaster. What you want to do in a grid down, that's totally up to you. But it does need to be simple. And so I like simple radios that have a volume adjustment knob and usually a knob for the frequency that you need to be on and minimal buttons to mess up. And if you're concerned with them accidentally rotating the frequency knob, you can always set it up so there's only 2 frequencies in the radio and it's hard for them to get on the wrong frequency. You program, if it's 16 channels, you program 1 through 15 is the same channel, and then the emergency channel is 16. If they bump it 1 or 2 clicks while they're working, they're still where they need to be. And then if things go sideways and the main channel doesn't work, they just grab the knob and wind it all the way out to 16 and they go. That's one way to do that. And this works only if you've pre-planned things. I'm going to talk about that too here. But for team communications, it needs to be simple. And if you're preparing for a group or your neighborhood or a group that you don't have yet, having a bunch of gear to hand out in that case is super handy, and it doesn't have to be expensive. You can get away with some of the cheaper Chinese radios, just have extras and make it simple, particularly with FRS or the mirrors, the VHF stuff, and I'll talk about why you might want to use that here in a minute. The default, while I was in Western North Carolina, the radio band that I saw in use more than any other radio band far and above was the family radio service, was FRS. It was the Walmart bubble pack radios, okay? Because everybody's kids had some somewhere, and everybody dug those things out, and they were all trying to get them to communicate. Well, here's the problem, and this is where the radio guy in the room has to get involved, is because some of those are Midland, some of those are Motorola, some of those are Redivus, some of those are Baofeng, some of those are, whatever brand. All of them use different privacy codes, and how their privacy codes, the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the privacy codes, what that actually means changes. And that's a problem, because that's something that you've got to figure out how to get all of them to work together, or you just turn the privacy codes off, which is what most people do. That's the simple solution. We just don't run PL tones, and we just, use carrier squelch, and it means we're going to have to listen to some noise now and then, but at least everything works. And then this is great until you run into some of those Redivus and Baofeng radios that require a computer to go in and change that, because you can't do it from the keypad. Well, if you've planned ahead and you've programmed your radios that way and you want to use those, go for it. It's a fine solution. If other people in the neighborhood have them, they're probably using them the way they came out of the box, and they're probably not going to work with anything until you get in and reprogram them. And I saw that a lot. That was not an uncommon issue, and it did cause us a bit of a headache at times. Now, that being said, the FRS was a commonly used and great solution. People were using their Baofengs on FRS. They were using bubble pack radios. It was whatever. And that was also a very common request that we saw coming out of some of the communities that were needing disaster relief supplies, was, can you send us FRS radios? We need FRS radios so we can communicate with the people in our community. So that was a common request. And that was also a request that was not easy to fill. Something, again, to kind of keep in mind is maybe you have some of those stuff back for your community for a couple $100. You can buy a bunch of cheap FRS radios. I do suggest you get the 2-watt versions. The FCC changed the rules back, I think it was in 2018, allowing some of the channels on GMRS and FRS, particularly FRS in this case, to operate at 2 watts instead of 500 milliwatts, and those radios perform much, much better. And Chinese tariffs not involved, there are plenty of manufacturers out there that have sub $20 radios that fit that bill. Now, as you are doing your team communications planning, something you need to keep in mind is that you may have a need to use more than one channel. It seems intuitive at first, let's just throw everybody on the same channel of the radio in our community and let's roll with it. That can be good in certain aspects. If someone needs help, they have the highest probability of getting help. But at the same time, if you have a group that is heavily using communication, say they're road clearing down trees and debris, and they're using machinery and they're communicating with each other back and forth inside of machinery, it may be better to move those guys off to another channel where they can communicate with each other and everybody else doesn't have to listen to it. Because one of the problems that does happen, as there is a lot of traffic on the radio channel that is not related to the job that someone is doing, they have a tendency to just turn their radio down. And I've seen this over and over in my career commercially, that the amount of unnecessary chatter related to one's job is directly proportional to the likelihood that they will turn down their radio and not have it turned up when that you need to reach them. So something to keep in mind on that front as you're planning. And again, that's something that's got to be tweaked and adjusted on the fly, is plan those aspects of your team communications. And earlier I mentioned that, having the big long antennas and that kind of stuff that you hung up on everything is sometimes not the best solution. It is if you need the range, but if you don't need the range, then, they just get in the way. Well, sometimes here in team communications, we actually want a less efficient antenna because we don't want the range. We don't want to be interfering with the community that's 3 miles away that's trying to do the same thing that we're trying to do in a finite amount of radio spectrum, and maybe we're having to share some stuff, so it's better if we don't reach that community with some of the things that we're doing so that they have the freedom to use that stuff as well. So something to keep in the back of your head is going as far as you possibly can go with your communications is not always necessary and needed, and should be applied appropriately. Now, another thing that I want to bring up and talk about, and this is maybe even a little more steered toward those of you that may be in the disaster relief world, that may be working with your church or your ministry or whatever group it is that you are working with. And that is, we had issues in FRS with interference. Just as was the benefit earlier that everybody has an FRS radio or their kids have an FRS radio, this can also be a downside. So if you have your base of operations oftentimes set up kind of on the edge of normal and disaster. So, because you need roads to be in good enough condition to get big stuff in and out and receive relief supply deliveries, but you need to be close to the people that need it. So oftentimes you're kind of on that interface of disaster and not disaster. And because of that, on the not disaster side, things are kind of business as usual for a lot of people. And you're going to have kids playing on FRS. If I turn my FRS radio on scan here in my office, any given day, I will hear 2 or 3 groups of kids around the neighborhood on Saturday playing with their radios. One of the issues that we did run into was kids on the FRS frequency that they were trying to use to coordinate drop-offs and deliveries and work with people who were in the yard receiving donations and distributing donations and all that stuff. They would have kids that would pop up and would try to talk to them or would be causing interference or singing songs, whistling, doing all the silly stuff your kids do on FRS. And that's FRS, it's Family Radio Service. It's there for kids to play with too. They have just as much right to use it as anyone else does, and maybe they don't have the etiquette and the politeness to move to another frequency, but that can be an issue on FRS when you're planning and doing your coordination on it, and that is something to keep in mind. And then that brings me to AmRRON, which is the VHF version of FRS. It's called the Multi-Use Radio Service. It's intended for anyone to use unlicensed. It has a little bit more of a business leaning to it. There's only 5 channels. The radios are a lot less common. And because of that, there's a lot less people on it. that might be something that you want to consider if you have if you're running an operation, that you may want to run your operational communications on mirrors so you don't experience interference from as many people randomly running around out there with FRS radios. So that can be a benefit. Not 100% necessarily a benefit, but it can be a benefit. But also understand that means you're going to have trouble communicating with other people, and some people may need both radios. But again, something to consider to deal with some of the interference issues. You will also find people that just want to cause interference because you're out there trying to do good, and for some reason, they hate the world and everybody in it, and they get some sort of enjoyment out of trying to make your life difficult. And they will do everything they can to try to interfere and cause problems with you being on FRS or ham radio at times too. We'll talk about that in a minute. Having, that alternate option there, it might be something that you want to consider. Okay. It's just one of those things, because you will get unintentional interference and you will get intentional interference. Every emergency thing. There was a weather net going on a local repeater here over the weekend, and there was a drunk guy, I'm pretty sure he was drunk, from one state away that was causing interference. And it was really frustrating to everybody who was involved. When I was in Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee doing disaster relief, I personally had people interfering with me. In fact, my audio made it out there on the internet where I was recording it on a couple of other podcasts and YouTube channels, that there was, and I'm pretty sure that at least one of them was drunk on the radio. And usually this happens later at night. They were drunk on the radio causing interference, and they thought it was funny. And it was not funny to those of us who were in the middle of nowhere trying to get stuff done. But that is something that you will 100% without a doubt run into. There are people out there that I just don't know what's wrong with them. Maybe they were dropped on their head as a kid. I don't know. But all they want to do is cause problems. And then there's the people who don't know that they're causing problems. And I want to talk about that situation real quick here, too, as we continue to talk about team communications, because all of this stuff involves team communications. You're going to, in that situation, you're as a team going to have to plan on how are we going to deal with this. If somebody shows up here and is causing interference, where do we go? What do we do? How do we continue to communicate? Because it's not like I can pick up my cell phone and text Joe, hey, we're going to move to GMRS or FRS 22 because of these guys, because he doesn't have cell service. He's outside of cell service. Or what does your community do when there's somebody who is that person in the community that has a bone to pick with everybody for whatever reason, because they just woke up on the wrong side of the bed every day of their life, that wants to be a pain to everybody that's trying to help the community. Because y'all have met that guy, okay? We've all met that guy. Have that plan. Now, there's the unintentional interference. And these are the people that are causing interference and they don't realize it because they don't know what they don't know. And they don't know that they don't know what they don't know. And I've seen this a lot. This was actually an issue that I was told a little bit about during the hurricane, that there was some interference being caused with public service in some areas. And undoubtedly what was going on is some people had acquired some radios, such as the Bow Things or other radios, probably off Amazon. They had just punched in a frequency on all of them so they could communicate with each other, and they had no idea anything about anything. And it so happens that they happen to be on a state emergency management interop frequency. And there was a lot of manpower and effort put into locating them and getting them off that frequency because it was causing significant problems to certain people in an area. Because one of the things that, I'm going to put the nerd hat back on. We're going to talk nerd here for just a second. The APCO P25, the digital mode that a lot of public service people use, as opposed to analog that all of us are using most of the time, if you're using an analog radio and you're interfering with a P25 signal, it causes the audio to glitch and break up like a bad stream on the internet, or it just causes the audio to go away, and it appears as a coverage problem. Hey, our radios are not working in the area they're supposed to be working in. What's wrong with our equipment is the thing that you get as a radio tech from the people on the ground, because they can't hear the interference. Well, then the radio tech shows up, turns the service monitor on, or puts a analog receiver on that frequency to listen to the data and see what's going on. And he hears two yahoos talking on FM analog transmissions in the area that don't have any business being on that frequency. And generally the first thing you do is you transmit back to them and see if you can get them to move. And if they're polite and they don't know what they're doing, a lot of times they'll go, "Oh, we didn't know we were causing interference. Sorry," and they'll move. And no harm, no foul in those sorts of situations. Nobody's going to put the effort into going and tracking you down, whatever. But if you don't respond, or they're not able to get to you for some reason, then, that's when the looking for ensues, and we got to come up with a solution to this, because going and finding them is a lot easier than emergency management people are licensed to be on that frequency. That's where they have to be. That's an example of unintentional interference. Same thing happens in amateur radio with that kind of thing. There was an incident here a couple years ago where there were some people, and I'm just going to say where it was. It was at Windrock Off-Road Park, that were off-roading, and they were using probably bow things to communicate. They had no idea what frequency they were on, and they had decided that they were going to talk while they were on the trail on the input frequency to a repeater here locally, and said input frequency was causing them to be rebroadcast all over the east end of the state, and they had no idea. And of course, no one could get to them to talk to them on the radio, because they didn't know where they were until we radio direction found it a little bit and figured out where that they were, and finally tried to get to them by getting closer to them. But that was a problem. And what ends up happening, someone's causing interference, and that way they don't know they're causing interference. They don't know they haven't taken the time to learn, hey, I shouldn't be here because I could potentially cause interference to a lot of people. And then what happens is we have to turn the repeater off, because they're saying, one, they're not licensed, but two, they're saying things that legally you're not allowed, you're not supposed to say. They're using words that we're not supposed to be using on the radio. And we have to turn the repeater off. And then that takes that asset out of play. And in this case, it wasn't an emergency. It wasn't a disaster. So it wasn't a huge, huge deal. But if you have that problem going on during a disaster like Hurricane Helene, you have someone that has unintentionally taken a important asset out of the game for communications, and that has an impact on everybody. So those are things you have to plan around, because you will get unintentional interference, because like it or not, for all of us, there's a significant amount of people on the internet that think they know more than they do, and they cannot be convinced that they need to learn a little bit about radio. And they act very, that's their mentality shows whenever someone tries to say, look, you probably ought to learn a little bit about this. Those are things in team communications. Now, as we further team communications, there's a lot of cool tricks and things you can do in team communications. There's just the analog FM. There's the coordination. There's the nuts and bolts. That's the meat and potatoes of team communications, is this voice back and forth. And earlier, we talked about setting your gear up right, having the speaker mics, having a good case, locking your radios down so that you don't end up somewhere you're not supposed to. All of those things are important for team communications, being able to hear with ear pro on. A lot of us don't think about that because we have this idea, I'm going to be out sneaking around, walking patrols and whatever. No, you're going to be running chainsaws and heavy machinery. Moving debris, doing stuff like that. That's far more likely than any of the other situations. Not to say we shouldn't prepare for the worst, but we should also prepare for what's likely to happen. This past week, we've had a lot of tornadoes, Oklahoma, St. Louis, Kentucky. And how is communications impacted in those areas? It varies depending on how big the tornado was. Hurricanes, they happen, all these things. And, we look at this, and then there's Sure, there's Starlink and other things, but I can't carry a Starlink in my pocket. I can carry a radio in my pocket. So for team communications becomes an important thing because it's portable and it's effective and it's simple. We use those things. We build consistency. Having consistency is important. Having rugged gear, because I'm going to bust on hams here for a minute, okay? Sorry, guys. Y'all are my brothers, but you're getting busted on here. A lot of ham radio gear's junk, okay? Even some of the like big name brand stuff, it's just not rugged. And if you take it out in the field and you work with it, you're probably going to break it. It was designed for people that play radio, that don't use radio as a tool. And for those of us that are into communications from the kind of the perspective I am, from the things we do in prepping and survival and commercial, and we use our radios as a tool. It's a hammer, it's a circle saw, it's a, whatever. It's a tool and it's there to be used, and we don't abuse it, but we don't baby it either. We need to pick gear that if I get water splashed on me or I've got to work in a downpour, it's still going to work when I get done, okay? It's got to be a tool that I can get accessories and parts and fix if it's of any significant amount of money, because I'm going to break a knob, I'm going to break an antenna, I'm going to wear a battery out, and I'm going to need another battery. All of these things, I'm going to break more headsets and handsets and speaker mics and whatever than you can shake a stick at. And I need to be able to get this stuff, but it also needs to last more than one outing, okay? I don't need to be putting a new speaker mic on my radio every night because I broke the last one. We need to think about that. We also need to think about one of the things I've seen in some of the cheaper radios, the plug that the speaker mic plugs into on the side of it. I think they figure in China that, you're going to plug it in once, program it, and then that's going to be the only time you use that, or maybe you're going to plug a speaker mic in and leave it. Well, if you're plugging and unplugging that stuff every day or every couple of days and it's not good quality, you're going to wear it out. We need equipment when we're looking at and we're picking our equipment that can stand up to some abuse. And there's a lot of gear out there that will, but that needs to be something we look at in our team communications. And then we have a team communications plan. And then we have to teach people to use the radio in team communications. Here's more class stuff for you. Don't look at ham radio as how to communicate on the radio, okay? Ham radio people on the radio, I love you guys, but you talk too much, okay? We need to communicate information as concisely and quickly as we can, and then get off the radio during an emergency, because that radio is an asset to everyone. It's a tool. It's not there for us to rag chew for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes about everything going on. It's there to facilitate the mission. So you need to teach your people that are using radios how, one, to initiate contact, how to use the NATO phonetic alphabet to spell, how to communicate concisely the information they need to move, even if that means writing it down beforehand. Sometimes when you have very specific things you need to communicate over the radio, get out that write in the rain pad that you got in your shirt pocket. You do have a write in the rain pad in your shirt pocket, right? And you write down all the information, because you're taking notes when you're in the field, right? Because you're sleep deprived and you've got, enough caffeine to keep an elephant awake for the next month. Running through your system, you're going to forget. So you write that stuff down that you need to relay, and then you get on the radio, you establish communications with who it needs to go to, and then you relay that information, make sure they've got it, and then you get off the radio. Okay? Those are skills that we need to focus on, because we don't need the 20-minute version of a 2-minute problem. Focus on that. Focus on those concise communications. Again, that's one of the reasons I like digital. Now, does digital have a place in team communications? I think so. But again, I'm a digital guy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here. Most stuff you're going to do with voice. However, there are times that if certain people have a role where they need to send accurate, detailed information, maybe even a photograph. Did you know you can send a photograph over 2 meter or VHF radio with the right software and stuff? Maybe they need to send a photograph because a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Maybe there's a couple unique people that need to have that capability. Everybody doesn't necessarily need to, but maybe it fits your job, your role. Maybe you're going through and you're collecting notes about supplies that need to be delivered to these addresses, and you're putting that stuff in your notepad, or you're typing it out on your tablet or your laptop, and you're going to put that in a form, and then instead of waiting until tonight when you get back to the release center to get that stuff out, maybe there's another team coming out this afternoon. And you, rather than spending 15 minutes on the radio relaying all these addresses and the stuff they need or the medication or whatever, you just type all that stuff in a message. You send it in 30 seconds, and then you go on about your business. And that allows you to be quicker. It allows more accuracy. It allows a lot of beneficial stuff. So in team communications, is there that? But that also is bordering into strategic communications, and that's where the team strategic kind of blurs, because now you're dealing not just with your team that's on the ground, you're dealing back to the emergency operations center or the TOC or whatever. So, have you crossed that line from team? And that really depends on the scale of the operation. Those are things to consider. Generally in team communications, some people might say, I want to be able to locate my team members by having their radios squawk their location, their GPS location every so often, so you can keep track of them. Again, might be an application for digital, but largely team communications are just going to be simple, and they need to stay simple. And we need to keep that stuff in, the more complicated the digital stuff, that needs to stay with the radio person. And if there's a radio person on the team, then maybe they deal with the interop of that. But again, team communications, it's about instant, immediate, actionable information within a small area and a smaller group of people, and a plan and teaching those people how to communicate. Now, let's talk a little bit about strategic communications. So strategic communications is something that in the prepping community that we don't spend nearly enough time talking about. Strategic communications are the communications that drive the fight. If you can't communicate, you cannot effectively logistically move stuff you need to move, and you become ineffective. Okay? Without, they say an army marches on its stomach. Okay? If an army marches on its stomach, then there has to be food there to fill the stomach. That's a logistical function. Well, how do we know that they need food there to fill their stomach? We can assume, and we can just send food every so often and hope for the best. But what about the guy that needs part to fix the stove in the kitchen? Well, that's where we have to be able to communicate effectively with logistics in order to be effective. It also is critical to knowing what we have in the bigger picture situation. And if you're running an operation that is 100 deep, 200 or 1,000 deep, every step this gets more complicated, and there is more information on a strategic level that needs to be shared. So we have to consider, how are we going to move this strategic information? Hey, the field hospital needs all of these supplies because we keep having to treat X, Y, and Z injury, and we're running out. Well, that's a strategic communication. Hey, the bridge that's on highway whatever is about to collapse, and we need to make sure all the teams know this. That's a strategic communication. Hey, everybody's off grid right now, and there is a storm with a tornado tag that has already produced 2 EF4s that's going to be moving into our area in approximately 7 hours. That's strategic information that's coming from outside. That's important things for us to communicate. Well, when we look at strategic communications, we have several options for strategic communications anymore. And some of these are different and better maybe than others in different situations. The kind of go-to for strategic communications right now is Starlink, because Starlink is frankly amazing in these situations, especially in natural disasters. If there is a Starlink near every team, then the comms person on that team has a link from all those people with handheld radios back to the emergency operations center, TOC, or anywhere else they need to send information in the world. So this is a very powerful tool. And if you have access to a lot of Starlinks, and you can put one with every team, and you can power them, and you can provide the logistical support that the Starlink needs to work, then this is a great solution. Works absolutely phenomenal, and is something definitely to consider. Another option is the use of WinLink. In PrepperNet, we do a monthly WinLink net, and we encourage folks to be familiar with WinLink because that's a way to use HF amateur radio to send emails over the radio to outside the impacted area. That's another way to move your logistical strategic information, because I can be sitting in my desk 100, 200, 300, 400 miles away working on putting supply orders together to get into the disaster zone, and you who are completely grid down in the backcountry or on a medical mission in Honduras can send me an email, hey, I need this stuff. And then we just get it in our email, we respond to it and send the stuff. Or you got a question, hey, can I get a consult medically on this issue, whatever. And it allows people who aren't radio people to interact with people who are radio people, and reduces the number of skilled operators that you have to have. So, WinLink is another way to do that. And that's, in prepping, we don't think about this strategic level of communications. We kind of assume that this is we've watched too many movies. We assume that radio is organically going to come together, and we're just going to get this information, and we're going to find out all this stuff by going and dialing around the radio, and that's just not going to happen. A couple weeks ago, during the Spain blackout, some of you guys probably remember that, there was a video that got posted of this guy in Spain who was kind of being a jerk, that interrupted a contest. I think it was in Germany, no, it wasn't Germany. It was, I don't remember. It was somewhere else it was somewhere else outside of Spain, asking the net control, can you tell me something about the blackout? And net control's clueless. I mean, he's been running a contest station all day and hasn't been paying attention to the news and knows nothing about the blackout. And the guy's kind of being mean to him. The point being here, you're not just going to be able to hop on the radio and find some random Joe that's going to have information or know what you want to know. Also, is this random Joe going to even be a credible source of information? I mean, I kind of thought it would have been funny if the net control had said, oh, yeah, didn't you hear the Russians are invading Spain? I thought that would have kind of been funny. Probably wouldn't have been funny for most people, but I thought that would have been funny. You don't know what kind of information you're getting because you don't know this guy from Adam. He could just totally BS you, and you have no way of knowing. So you got to build that network now, and you got to get to know those people, find those people, do radio with them, build that community before something happens, so that, one, you have someone that you trust and know to go to for information, and so that you have a plan to how to make communications and contact with that person if that happens. And preferably it's not a person, preferably it's like 100 persons that are spread all over the place, so you can all come together and really get a picture of what is going on. Because it was very interesting, kind of a real rabbit trail here. I'm going to go squirrel for a minute. One of their PrepperNet folks that was at bugout camp, or not bugout camp, was at prepper camp down in Saluda when the hurricane hit, got his radio up, sent out a beacon on a piece of software to see who else was out there, and he got like 2 responses. And he thought, oh, my antenna sucks. Well, his antenna wasn't great, but that wasn't the problem. He didn't realize that the scope of the situation was that at that time of the day, most of the stations that he would have ordinarily gotten a response from were off the air because their antennas were on the ground because of how widespread the damage was. And that couple of people that he was getting stuff from were far enough away that they were outside of the impacted area. So again, variable things can be learned on a strategic level for getting an operational picture of the situation that you're in if you're in the midst of the problem. But then there is also, as we mentioned, the strategic and logistical side of that communication, where that we are passing and coordinating between a lot of groups of people. Here's how we're going to attack this problem. Here's the resources we have to attack this problem. Hey, I'm coming into town and I've got 7 tractor trailer loads of X. Where do we need to go? And those are strategic level communications. And maybe those are a repeater. It's got a big footprint with VHF. We saw a lot of that with Mount Mitchell. It was kind of the hub of that stuff in western North Carolina. Over here in East Tennessee, we didn't have that. We didn't have that option. There were other issues at play, and communications were a bit more difficult. It can also be HF radio. HF has its own set of issues. We mentioned the antennas down there. You have to have a plan if your stuff gets damaged during a natural disaster. But that's an option. Starlink was an option. There were all of these different things that were options, and understanding as we look at strategic communications that everybody in the group is not going to be a strategic communicator. When you have a team, when you have a big organization, that's why you have communications people. That's why people like me do this kind of stuff, because that's our niche. That's how we do this. It's what we like. It's what we excel at. And we're here to support the guys that are making the other decisions and processing the information. Just like the guys who are doing that probably aren't interviewing and doing intelligence production. That's what the intelligence guys do. And they pass that and all the other predictions to the guys that are the decision makers. And then they get the information from us, from logistics, of what's available and what's needed. And they put all this stuff together and they build a plan. And then those of us who are in communications have to disseminate that plan out to everyone that is operating outside the wire, as it were. So there's a lot that goes into the strategic level of communication. And a bunch of you guys are going, Patrick, why do I care about this? Because if the balloon goes up, there's an EMP or a CME or a whatever, who am I going to get logistical support from? Well, why do I care about this? Because all I'm going to be doing is it's going to be me and my 5 buds and our Realtree camo with our Mossberg 500s out in the woods and our trucker caps doing security around the perimeter of our, moonshine still or whatever. Trying to make this funny for you guys. How does this apply to us? Well, if it is the end of the world as we know it and all that stuff has happened, congratulations, you just won the lottery. I mean, it is not common, and we can use that as a crutch and an excuse that, I'm not going to learn all this other stuff, and I don't want to do this stuff, and I don't want to meet these people, and I don't want to build these networks, and I don't want to do this stuff because, hey, it's going to be the end of the world when somebody sets off an EMP in China, okay, awesome. But 5 states got hit by a hurricane last year that caused major damage, and there are still places 2 days, 6 months later that just now are getting power back. They probably still don't have very good communications. There are still the bridge on US 107 where we were near in Cherry Grove just got reopened. This stuff happened, and it happens somewhere in the world every year. So are you going to spend all your time and effort in something that's tactical fantasy land for the most part, or that you're preparing for something that's a black swan, a very low probability, very high impact situation that frankly is easy? Or are you going to focus your time on preparing for something that is really likely to happen, that is politically messy when it does, because there's all kinds of egos and stuff you don't know about when you walk into the situation, that this community over here for years has been into it with the county government over X, Y, and Z. You have no idea, and now they're using this as a chance to try to run them off. There's just all these weird things that come into play, or these people aren't getting resources because they helped oust so-and-so politician because they didn't like them or whatever. And then the politician got back in office and now they're not sending supplies to those people. There's all kinds of stupid political crap that goes on during a disaster. We want to save face, and we're not letting anybody in from the outside to help because we can do this ourselves. And if we let somebody in, it looks like we're not competent. There's so many stupid things that go on, and there's so much. It's dirty, and it's people, and it's the stuff that a lot of us don't want to deal with and think about. But it's also the reality of what's going to happen in most situations. And a lot of people, and don't get me wrong in saying that, that's not what it's like everywhere. There are lots of people that are wonderful, the best people you will ever meet, trying to help people, doing wonderful stuff. And those people outnumber the people that are being a pain in the rear end 10 to 1. But there is that one out there that's going to be a pain and that's going to take up, if any of you guys have supervised employees in the past, and you're a manager, y'all know that there's that one employee that like takes 75% of your managerial time and everybody else only takes 25% because they're that employee. There's that in a disaster too. It's human nature. It's part of how we are as humans, and it's part of the human experience. So we have to look at and we have to consider all of this stuff and logistical and all of these things, and figuring out, planning and communicating, dealing with people that want to cause harmful interference, people that want to interfere with you trying to help other people, people that are doing things that just make us go, why would you do this? We're out here trying to be the hands and feet of the Most High and help people, and you just want to get in the way and make your life difficult and make the people that need help's life difficult. Those are things that you got to deal with, and it's just part of being in a fallen world, man. It's just part of it. I'm starting to go down a rabbit trail here that I'm going to reel myself back from because I don't want to start preaching. But we're with strategic communications. It's the bigger picture, and that's where your more skills come in. That's where your HF, your Starlinks, your digital over VHF and UHF. There are things like you can set up a WinLink gateway, add a Starlink, and then the people who are within, VHF simplex, a few miles of that, can extend that Starlink out and be able to send email at least over that. There's ways you can also link voice over IP audio in and out. There's all kinds of stuff you can do at that point to kind of extend that last mile. But those are ways you can strategically communicate, because strategic communications are really the thing that marks between an effective and an ineffective organization. If you're not effective with your strategic communications, you're going to end up with a bunch of people standing around not doing something, waiting on supplies, waiting on fuel, waiting on whatever. And that's not a effective use of God's resources at that point. There's not an effective use of the resources that we've been blessed with, because we got assets and things that we can use to make a difference. And they're standing here because they can't get a hydraulic hose to fix their equipment because we don't have an effective way to communicate that somebody needs to run to the hydraulic shop and get me a 5-foot long 5/16 hose with, whatever size SAE fittings on the end of it. We need that kind of logistical support. And that's where communications and strategic communications really come in. And that's what separates a big organization from the youth group at your local church trying to go help. And I'm not saying that the youth group at the local church is doing something wrong by trying to go help. I'm just saying that once we graduate beyond that, we have to graduate in all the areas in order to maintain effective. Otherwise, we lose effectiveness and we end up with a bunch of people standing around leaning on shovels because they don't have the stuff they need to do their job. That's why this is critical. That's why learning this stuff. And I don't want to, we can geek out on digital modes and all that stuff another day. I don't want to go too far down that path, but it's about effectiveness. It's about the ability to coordinate. But those are things that you really need to look at as you're building and thinking about, how do I plug in? What do I do? How does my group, how does my ministry, how does all this stuff, how do we do this when the cell phones stop working, when the internet doesn't exist because all the telephone poles are laying in the creek, how do we do this, and how do we do it effectively, and how do we avoid the pitfalls that others already know? They say that if you don't learn from others' mistakes, you're doomed to repeat them, and that's goes wholeheartedly in communications. We got 100 years of communication screw-ups in the military and the civilian world, and trust me, they happen every day. I see it every day, the same communication screw-ups that somebody else screwed up with, and you'd think eventually these people would figure it out, and they don't. So we want to avoid those. We want to be better than the average. We want to excel at what we do, and preparing and learning this stuff it's an important part of prepping, because in a disaster, in a grid down, knowing how to hit a target at 500 or 1,000 yards can be important. Okay, it's a skill worth having. But you're going to use your communications capability a lot more than you're going to use your firearms. And that's not to say don't have them. Just like you're going to use your communications abilities, frankly, a lot more than you're going to use your year's supply or 2 years' supply of food. Doesn't mean don't have it. Communications is one of those things that you'll find yourself using frequently once you develop the skill set and once you have the equipment. So I encourage everyone that's out there, maybe you're just getting into this, maybe you've dabbled your toes into the communications world, and you go, hey, I got my Baofeng, I'm checking into some local nets, I want to be able to go help people. Well, this is where the extra skills, the tips, the tricks, some of the stuff we've talked about today, the things that you can learn doing things in the real world and thinking about these situations. Hey, great, you've got the skills. You know how to use a radio. You've learned how to program a radio. Hey, do you have the gear that if I said, hey, I need you to roll with this group of folks that are going out to do medical assessments over here, you guys are going to take this UTV. Once you get a mile or two from here, we're not going to be able to reach you on simplex range anymore. And the repeater that we can all reach is 40 miles away, and you're going to need 50 watts and a mobile to get to it. Do you have the stuff that you can go, okay, give me 10 and I'll be ready to roll? Or are you going to look at everybody like, I don't know if I can do this? Having that confidence, having that ability, critical to being able to help effectively. And don't, those of you guys who are out there and are listening that are like, I don't know anything about communications. It's just not my thing. That's fine. I get it. It's not for everybody. And excelling at it is not for everybody. It can be done. I have faith in everybody that's out there listening. You guys can do all of this if you want to. You can become great at it. It just requires some time and dedication. But also understand, how do I use communications with the rest of my gifting? Because God gifted us with everybody with something. How does this fit in, and what do I need to know to facilitate my skill set in an emergency? How can I be the hands and feet to help people with my skills? And how does communications fit in that? Do I just need to know how to smash the push to talk button and quickly and concisely relay some information? Okay, cool. Learn to do that. That's all you need to facilitate what you're going to do. If you're a heavy equipment operator, you're going to come and run an excavator, and you need to be able to communicate with the people who are around you. Okay, that's all you got to do. That may be the extent of your needed, ability. If you're an IT person, or you're a, somebody that deals with telecommunications and that kind of thing, and you want to go and you want to help set up Starlinks, and you want to help set up equipment, and you want to help, temporarily set up networks in places that are knocked off grid so that they can communicate effectively. You set up Wi-Fi access points, and you're going to set up your Starlink and your 10 gig fiber Ethernet switches and your, whatever. Maybe you need to learn a little bit more about radio communications as well, so you're able to communicate and coordinate with the rest of your team while you're out there getting stuff set up, so you can be more effective. Maybe that is what you need to learn. If you're a guy that's got, hey, I've got a really nice off-road rig, I can do recon, I've got some experience doing damage assessments, maybe from construction work, insurance work, or whatever. and I really want to support, well, you're going to need a way to relay and communicate that stuff back. And maybe it's a sat phone. So maybe that's a solution. Or maybe you need to get your ham radio license and you need to get a 50-watt mobile installed in your truck, and you need to do it right, and you need to be ready and able to communicate with wherever you roll into, however they want to support. And that's the other thing as a communications person that I stressed earlier, that ability to adjust and adapt on the fly. If you're part of a group and your group is rolling in and you have everything and your stuff's wound on tight and you're ready to go, that's one thing. If you're just average guy out here that's going to go and volunteer my time with this organization to support what they're doing, you need to be prepared to roll into whatever that organization is doing and function, which means your gear is going to have to be adaptable. So when you show up and they say, hey, we're using FRS, great, I can do that. Hey, we're using ham radio for this. This is the repeater frequencies that we're on and the tone. Got it. Good. Hey, we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're running HF. We're doing HF digital and WinLink to communicate out of here until we can get some more Starlinks because we're out of Starlinks. Can you go here and set up and do this? Yeah, got it. Yeah, and not everybody's got to be able to do all of those things. But where do you fit, and what's your assessment of you and how you want to do it? And with that, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. I could probably sit here and ramble for a long time more. That being said, guys, thank you for listening. I hope you found some of this stuff valuable. Check out my YouTube channel over at Grid Down Comms Up. I've not got a lot of stuff up there. I'm slowly adding a few more things so you guys can see some of this stuff in the field in action and hopefully be inspired a little bit. Also, don't forget, I will be at the Eastern Tennessee Homestead Alliance Festival, September 12th and 13th of this year. And also, if you're new to this, if you're new to PrepperNet, you just listen to the Prepping Academy podcast, I encourage you to go over to www.preppernet.net and sign up. It's free. It is PrepperNet's private social media platform where you join. It's kind of like Facebook, but it's its own private platform where we can talk about pretty much what we want and don't have to worry about being censored or deplatformed. Again, I encourage you guys to go over there. There's a section for everybody. There's a lot of wonderful people. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I would have friends in probably 50% of the states around the U.S. that I could call up and ask a question, I would have said you're totally crazy. But that's the kind of community that is at PrepperNet and that I've been blessed to become a part of. I have friends for life from that group. So again, I encourage you guys go check it out and join us there. Also, every Sunday night, for those of you who are into HF radio, we do a digital net, HF digital net. We are on 7.090 megahertz upper sideband. We run digital modes, Contestia 4250 and usually MFSK 32 at 900 on the waterfall. If you don't know what any of that means, that's totally cool. There's some places you can go learn about it on our website. It's one of the digital modes. And usually we have between 20 and 30 people that show up from states all over the country and make themselves known there. So if that's something you're interested in, want to join and meet some people, build that network today and get to know those people today, then I encourage you to come hang out with us. And we look forward to seeing you on the air. With that, I want to thank again you guys for making the podcast what it is and listening. Have a wonderful and blessed week, and I will see you on the next episode of the Prepping Academy podcast.